everybody. If you are new here, I'm Paris Williams. I'm joined here with Bob Miller. These are our bi-weekly office hour sessions. Each session starts with a brief topic, and then we open the floor for Q&A, so feel free to submit any questions at any time. Each session is also recorded and posted up to our YouTube channel. So today's topic is Microsoft 365, protecting the front door to your business. So Bob is going to be covering that session topic and answering any questions that you have. So Bob, I'm handing over to you.
All right, thanks, Paris. All right, let me share my slide here. All right, so as Paris said, our topic today is Microsoft 365, protecting the front door to your business. And so when we're talking about Microsoft 365 here being the front door to your business, that's because it's the number one target from threat actors out on the internet trying to connect in. They're going to go through Microsoft 365. And right now, the biggest symptom that we have of a Microsoft 365 breach would be business email compromise. And if you're listening to my voice, you have definitely experienced this before at your company. And that's where somebody's email account has been taken over by a threat actor. Typically, an employee will respond to a phishing email and they will be prompted to enter their Microsoft 365 credentials. It might come from a legitimate source. It might come from your accountant or your attorney, or it could come from really anybody that you typically do business with. It could be impersonating them, or maybe they're compromised as well. And then it will often say something like, hey, here's the document you're looking for, or hey, here's the document to sign, or here is something you need to click in order to, I don't know, get paid this week, or something like that, right? Some sort of phishing email to get an employee to click on it. And then once they click on that link, then they have to enter their 365 credentials, which they may do. They might do it because that person is trusted, or it's a name that they recognize. And then once they do that, then nothing happens because there's nowhere for them to go. And they're like, hey, I don't know what's going on. Sometimes that's the sign that there's been a compromise. Sometimes they just move on with their life. Sometimes they reply back on the email, say, hey, the link didn't work. What do I do now? And meanwhile, precious seconds are going by where the threat actor has connected into that mailbox and is now creating custom rules and doing other nefarious types of things on that user's mailbox. And here's the thing, it's not a person doing it, right? It is a bot. And as soon as that credential compromise happens, when that user gives their Microsoft 365 credentials over, there's a bot on the other side that's just waiting for one of those requests to come in. They've got a token now for Microsoft 365, and now they're connecting in directly to your user's email account. And now they're doing all kinds of bad things with that email account. And if you've had it happen before, which you probably have, then you know what can happen and the types of things that they do. Typically, it will be a bunch of new rules in the email account that will say, hey, redirect emails to trash if they come from a different vendor. If it comes from this one email address, which is gobbledygook@gmail.com, then pin it to the top of the email list, flag it as important, rename it to this and that. So that way the user will see those new emails and those emails, and then they'll give them a higher priority. Lots of different things that could happen, but that's a business email compromise. It's the most common way that a Microsoft 365 breach happens. But there's more at risk than just an inbox or a user, or trying to trick a user into taking action. The risk could also be access to SharePoint or OneDrive. Everybody's using OneDrive. I mean, everybody. Even if you don't think you're using OneDrive, you are definitely using OneDrive because Microsoft, it redirects so much to the OneDrive service. But then there's also Entra ID, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And that's really where the biggest threat is with Entra ID. All Microsoft 365 accounts use Entra ID to log in. And with that login, you can access a lot more. So hang on, we'll get to that in a second. Also, there is the risk of data theft. So think about SharePoint or OneDrive and a threat actor being able to just start downloading the contents of your company's data. There's financial fraud, which is a little bit of what I mentioned when we were talking about business email compromise, and that is some tricking a user to maybe transfer money to a vendor or tricking user to enter the banking information from a trusted vendor, something like that. There's good old-fashioned ransomware. And then there's SaaS application compromise, SaaS meaning software as a service, and that's typically what runs your company. QuickBooks Online is a SaaS product. Salesforce is a SaaS product, things like that. That Microsoft Dynamics is SaaS. So more than likely your company is using a SaaS product in order to run the company, your line of business applications. And so that application can get compromised because it's not just email. Microsoft 365 breaches are not just about email. That is the most common today, but it is not just email because increasingly SaaS products like CRM systems, accounting platforms, HR systems, lots of things. They're using Microsoft 365 as a single sign-on. And why not, right? I mean, if we're already logging into Microsoft 365 for things, the user's maintaining that multi-factor authentication, they're maintaining that password. Why not also use Microsoft 365 to log into your SaaS products? It's increasingly becoming common, and it helps the SaaS application not have to develop their own single sign-on tool, and it's convenient for users and things like that. But when there's a Microsoft 365 single sign-on, a threat actor then can log in to basically anything that Microsoft 365 can, and that's a serious threat. Now, the cold reality of Microsoft is that they only protect their infrastructure, meaning the underlying servers, the actual Exchange Online service, the actual SharePoint service. They protect that from direct hacks from the outside internet threat actors and things like that. Microsoft isn't responsible for data loss or compromises from inside of your Microsoft 365 tenant. They're not responsible for that. So that means that it's your responsibility, it's your organization's job to protect user accounts, to protect permissions, policies, and to perform monitoring to keep those things protected. So it's really your job to do all of those things. Microsoft has very, very solid limitations of liability when it comes to that on their agreements. So there are 6 best practices for doing that, or 6 areas that are either not negotiable or almost not negotiable, depending on the industry that you're in. So, first of all, use built-in security features. Microsoft actually gives you a lot of security features. Microsoft Purview, there's the Microsoft Defender. There's a lot of tools like that are available at different licensing levels. Yes. So, more and more Microsoft is wanting everybody to use the business premium licensing, which gives you access to more security features. And then there are even additional levels above that of security features. Talk to us for more details about how that might impact your business or what your organization truly needs, what our recommendations are for that. But the long and the short of it is that there are really powerful security tools that Microsoft gives you right off the bat. One of those is multi-factor authentication. Now, this is baseline stuff. This comes with all levels of Microsoft licensing. Baseline stuff. Everybody must be using multi-factor authentication. I think I might mention this every single office hours. If I don't, then I must be having an off week because that's how important it is, because multi-factor authentication is absolutely critical. Um, Becoming more critical along those lines with built-in security features would be conditional access policies. Um, and I've been talking a lot more with clients about that recently. So if you're one of those clients, this is probably something you've already heard from me. If not, you will soon be. If you are not currently a client, then I highly suggest that you look at conditional access policies, which are available to you in the Microsoft Business Premium licensing, and as well as a few others. And what that will do is that will say, hey, look, if we are in, say, the Philadelphia area, or we have an employee who lives in the Las Vegas area, those mailboxes can only log in from those regions. You might also say something like mailboxes can only log in during certain hours of the day. There are a lot of different functions like that, a lot of different restrictions like that that you can place on mailboxes, and your Microsoft 365 tenant at large in order to prevent outside access. So let's take that example in the beginning of this office hours and talk about business email compromise. Well, if that user has logged into Microsoft 365, given away their token, and it's not actually 365 that they're logging into, it's really a phishing email, a link from a phishing email. That token can then be taken and given to somebody from, commonly it's Germany, Singapore is another one. There's certain hotspots where there are a lot of threat actors, and they would log in from those regions. Well, guess what? With conditional access policies, they can't. It just simply won't allow them to. There are certain pains in the neck that come with that. If you have an employee that travels frequently, for example, things like that. But and we can work with you on that. And there are certain ways around that. But in short, there are a lot of built-in security features like this that work remarkably effectively to secure the business. Another one is security awareness training. I think I talk about this a lot also. It's required, absolutely required by all cyber liability insurance policies. It's required by regulatory agencies. It is best practices. If you're not doing security awareness training, you need to start doing it. Certainly talk to us about it if you need some assistance with that. It is, you must be doing it. There's a legal liability that you have if you're not doing it. And it doesn't mean that you set your employees down for hours a month and, they got multiple emails and they have to do this, jump through hoops and think it can be very simple and very basic, but it is essential. And security awareness training can help an employee learn what to look for. For example, if they see an email from a trusted vendor, then they can be trained to look out for telltale signs that this might not be the actual vendor. But let's say that the vendor was compromised and the email did come from the vendor. The employee could be trained to say, oh, after I logged in, it didn't go anywhere. That's a huge red flag. I'm going to alert management. I'm going to alert my IT department. And so security awareness training is foundational. It's critical. Depending on your industry, data loss prevention, particularly in the legal industry, super important. And that's where it monitors what happens with data, where it goes, who sees it, and things like that. Another critical thing to do is to periodically log into 365 and remove ghost accounts. In other words, accounts for employees or services that are no longer exist or that you no longer need. If they're sitting out there and a credential is compromised, or maybe a token has already been compromised, just hasn't been used, a login can happen. And unless you're doing something else, the user is not going to notice any changes because the user doesn't exist anymore because they're a ghost account. And then finally, one of the most important things, also very foundational, is to monitor behavior. And that's typically done with ITDR, Identity Threat Detection and Response. Think of MDR, which is what we use, or EDR, which is what we use on desktops and servers and laptops and things like that. Except this is for your mailbox, and it monitors behavior. So, for example, in the case of a business email compromise, if somebody's token is stolen and they log in from Singapore, that's a huge red flag. Like nobody in the greater Philadelphia area or the Las Vegas area or New York City or San Diego, nobody in these areas is suddenly randomly going to start logging in from Singapore. It's just not happening unless you have business in Singapore, and then you deal with that in advance. But Singapore is a hotbed of threat actors. And so if we see an account that doesn't typically log in from Singapore, it's suddenly now logging in from Singapore, we can lock that down immediately. So in that case, if the user loses their token because they logged into 365 unwittingly, gave it away, then ITDR detects you've got new, suddenly just right now, a new login from Singapore. We can have a program to free the account instantly and limit the damage that that threat actor can do. So ITDR is super critical. But the biggest thing is with 365 is to maintain vigilance because things change on a dime. I mean, every single day the cybersecurity landscape changes, and every quarter there's a new threat, new priority that an organization needs to have, which is why we typically do quarterly security briefings. And certainly every year there's a new landscape earthquake or major shift that occurs. And so 365 got to maintain vigilance with it because it changes all the time. So, any questions? Anybody have any questions about any of that, or really, frankly, about anything at all? You can ask about it, as long as it's related to information technology or cybersecurity. My card knowledge is very limited, among other things, so I don't know how much help I can be in that area. But as far as our expertise, ask away.
Yeah, we got some really good questions
Yeah, we
in
got
while you
some
were
really
going over the slides. So the first one being, so you're saying Microsoft 365 isn't secure by default?
well, yeah. So there are some baseline protections, right? A password is a protection. Um, Multi-factor authentication is a protection. There are some baseline things, and certainly Microsoft, as I said, they keep their infrastructure safe. So the servers themselves, they keep safe, and they accept responsibility if there's a hack or something like that. Um, but outside of that, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so one of the things that we often recommend, we do it for every new client. Um, but one of the things we often recommend is going through a Microsoft 365 hardening phase. And that's where we go in and we manually check settings and we make sure that they're set right. And then if you're a client, we can enforce a lot of settings so that way they stay the same. And then we can also set it up so that way as those settings change and as best practices change, that we push down to your tenant the default best practices, which would not be Microsoft's defaults. These would be industry-wide defaults, or what we would recommend as defaults. And so we can set those up for you, certainly. But we often do Microsoft 365 hardening projects for clients of all sizes, just to make sure it's almost like an audit. There's always something that's found, there's always an issue somewhere because the environment is extraordinarily complex. And Microsoft makes changes to the environment literally every single day. Like literally every day, there are options changing, there's the interface changing, something's changing. And so it takes a lot to stay up on top of that.
How do we know if we're using MFA correctly?
Well, so for the individual user, if it prompts them for the code, the 6-digit code, or if it does a push notification to Microsoft Authenticator, or if you have Duo set up, or any of these sort of MFA options, if they get that, then we know that it's working for that user. But the overall question is, how do we know that it's enforced everywhere? And actually, the only way to know that would be to confirm the settings periodically to make sure that it's turned on everywhere. And spoiler alert, if you have a business email compromise, and you need to file a cyber liability insurance policy claim, that's the first thing that they look for is as MFA enabled universally. And if it's not enabled universally, it's a breach of terms, and they probably will not pay it out because also I say this, I think every single office hours, remember the insurance company's job is to not pay out. Like they don't exist just to hand over money. They exist to not hand over money. And so keep that in mind that they will find every possible reason to not pay out the policy. So MFA is a key to making sure that that's enabled is key for cyber insurance policies.
All right. What happens if one employee's account is compromised?
Um, well, okay, so if one employee's account's compromised, it's pretty bad because they can do a lot of damage. I mean, they can do a lot of damage with that employee, depending on that employee. And they're probably not worried too much about compromising the mailroom employee or the warehouse employee, right? They're probably looking to compromise somebody in human resources or payroll or in accounting, somewhere with money, because somebody who has access to money, no matter what the level, they have access. you- That's something threat actors want, right? So one employee's compromise could give away the farm, if they have banking information or credentials, or even if it's a lower level employee that has access to proprietary or confidential customer information, that can be held as a ransom against you, or it could be a PR nightmare. So it can be pretty bad. Now, it's it it's not common right now for them to laterally jump from one mailbox to another, so that's not as big of a concern. However, if security awareness training isn't done, um, then you could have multiple employees falling for the same phishing email. And then now somebody's got access to multiple employees, various data entry points, and then things they can escalate very quickly from there. And not to mention, of course, the fact that um, critically, more and more Microsoft 365 login, Entra ID is used to log into SaaS applications. So, um, you know, you start adding all of these things up, and one business email compromise can turn into a real nightmare for a company.
All right. The next question is, can attackers access our other systems through Microsoft 365? You kind of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, I kind of answered that one then. Yeah, they can. Yeah, right, exactly. Because if 365 is the single sign-on for that application, which is happening more and more all the time, um, then and the answer is not, by the way, to just not use Microsoft 365 Entra ID because it connects already to so many things.
Right.
And oftentimes in businesses now, that's also your entire network's login. It's not just Microsoft 365. Your Entra ID also logs you into the server and your computer. So the answer is not to say, oh, we won't use Microsoft 365 SSO. Actually, I would say, yes, do use Microsoft 365 SSO, but it just adds to the importance of how critical it is. It already was critical, but now it's even more critical to keep those accounts monitored, locked down with really good security policies.
How can we monitor suspicious activity?
That's with ITDR, Identity Threat Detection and Response. And so a good ITDR platform will monitor the 365 environment. It'll monitor the mailboxes, and it'll keep an eye on behavior. It'll look at, what's typical of this user, what's typical of all users, and it'll do certain things like, for example, impossible login is one of the most common conditions that we look for, where we lock down an account. And that's where if somebody's home base is, let's say you've got a work from home employee and they happen to live in, I don't know, let's say they live in the Bahamas, and which is a pretty sweet deal. And so if they live in there and they're always logging in from the Bahamas, well, suddenly now they're logging in from Germany while also still logged in from the Bahamas, and there's activity on both logins. That's impossible travel. There's no way one employee is in both places at the same time. So instantly, we're locking that account down. We're locking it down. And if we start seeing a couple accounts like that, you know what? We're just going to lock everything down because it's better to just shut all access off temporarily and restore it an hour or two later than it is to just let the hackers do whatever they want in our environment. We don't want that. We want to lock them out. So yeah, so that's a condition that we look for with behavior monitoring in ITDR.
I tried some policies, but it was a pain in the neck and made everyone's lives miserable. Did we do them wrong or what should we do?
No, you probably did them right. So, unfortunately, they could. And so you need really good, not just conditional access policies or Microsoft 365 policies or Entra ID policies or Azure policies or whatever it is that we're talking about. It's not good to just have those policies, those technical policies. We need administrative policies as well, meaning like real world policies, like in the handbook, employee handbook policies or operating procedures for how we do um like the traveling employee, for example, a salesperson who travels. Let's say they travel. We have a number of clients that have salespeople or field technicians who travel from the United States to China. And so what we do is we suggest that there's a policy written front, and it comes from HR, so it's part of the handbook. It's part of what the employee agrees to as being an employee of the company. Yeah, prior to their, like it's the employee's job, prior to their travel, like say a week in advance, they notify the IT department that they're traveling to this area and they give a start and stop time for that travel. Then the IT person, if there's an in-person IT person, or if it's an MSP like we are, for example, then they set a policy that says, okay, for the next 7 days, they can log in from Beijing. And then it stops after 7 days where they can't log in from Beijing anymore. And so there's a little bit of an administrative overhead, but actually it's not that hard because as long as you're following up the technical policies with real world administrative policies, that's kind of where the critical thing is.
Okay, I have one more question here. If my Office 365 account gets hacked, what's the first thing that I should do?
So the first thing to do is notify your IT department like immediately. Notify them right away. Um, and like don't just send an email and pray. um, Call them, let them know immediately. If they have text service, let them know over text. Let them know all the ways. Let them know immediately because they need to be able to respond really, really quickly to get that thing locked down. Now, if there's an ITDR monitoring, it might already have happened, but in the event that there's not an ITDR monitoring in place, then they need to get your account frozen immediately. So let them know right away. And also, the IT department or MSP, if you work with a company like ours, uh, they will have policies that they need to follow. So they'll have what's called an incident response plan. And so if you're listening and you're the CEO or the president, the founder, the owner of your company, hear me now. It is essential to have an incident response plan in place well in advance of an incident. So that way, all the different actors, all the different people in your company know what they're going to do, and it should be tested every 6 months, with what's called a tabletop exercise, and that's where you sit down and with IT, with HR, with all of the different actors, all the different participants, and run through a sample incident and see how the response plan works. If you work with an MSP like ours, if you're an internal IT department or a CEO and you work with an MSP like ours, we have a copy of that. We might even help with the development of it, and then that way you get you have everybody following that incident response plan, so that for the employee, the only thing they have to do is just call IT, say, "Hey, I've got this problem. This happened," and then that starts the ball rolling, and then everybody starts following the plan.
Okay, it looks like that was the last question that we got in. So, our next session is going to be March 25th. You can join using the same link that you used today. If you have any questions that you think of or any topic suggestions, anything you want us to go over, feel free to submit that on the form on our website or you could shoot us an email. And we look forward to seeing everyone at the next session. Bye, everyone.